Getting a gun seems like the natural next step, and at the time it felt like a career move. And instead I went home that night and just cried.
Jamil Jivani is living, breathing proof that people can take control and radically transform themselves from a wannabe criminal to a lawyer, scholar, and thinker. Chief on his mind, why young men end up on the wrong path and how they can be turned around. Rosie Barton spoke with him about that and more.
Jamil Jivani has made it his mission to help young men.
And the minute you start to think about your life differently, where you are not the victim of everything, you see
Jivani can relate. Growing up, he struggled in high school and didn't see much of a future for himself. From failing a literacy test at grade 10 to finding his path and graduating from Yale Law School, now he believes his story can help others.
You are an agent in this world that can change things. There's a better you that you haven't discovered. And never lose faith that that better you exists. So I appreciate you listening, man.
Jivani is working to pass along the lessons he's learned.
Thank you.
All the while battling an unexpected health issue. At the age of 30, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. He found out just before the release of his book, Why Young Men: Rage, Race, and the Crisis of Identity. I met up with Jamil Jivani earlier in Toronto.
Hello.
Hey.
Good to meet you finally.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
I just want to start sort of by trying to understand how you got to where you are and what your time was like in high school. You were not a success story.
No, not at all.
So tell me a little bit about the young man that you were.
Yeah, I think I started high school playing what I describe as a kind of game of chicken with myself, so to speak, where I was so infatuated with gangsters and rappers and kind of gangster movies, and I really wanted to be like the gangsters I saw on TV. And I idolized kind of criminal subculture. And, by the time I get to grade 10, I'm getting suspended from school and spent no time doing the things that you're supposed to do as a student. So in grade 10, I failed the literacy test, for example, and I'm labeled illiterate by the Ontario public school system. And certainly I was not illiterate, but based on what I showed in school, right, in those walls, they had no reason to think otherwise. And then by grade 11, I get to a point where this natural progression of trying to be a gangster and a tough guy leads me to the point where I, think about buying a gun for the first time.
Okay, so that's one of the most sort of gripping parts of your book.
Yeah, and so getting a gun seems like the natural next step. And at the time, it felt like a career move, right? It felt like planning for the future. Like this was the future I was kind of destined to live out, and I thought it was going to be this moment of rejoicing and fulfilling this destiny I thought I was supposed to have. And instead I went home that night and just cried. And it was really emotional, and I kind of felt like a failure. I'd kind of lost that game of chicken, right? Where I had to face the fact of Jamil, this is not the life for you. Right. And when I was writing the book, I had a chance to think about that day. What was it that made me kind of cry and give up on those dreams I had instead of kind of continuing down that path. And I think there were two reasons. So one was the only person who ever said anything nice to me was my mother. And my father wasn't around, so she meant a lot to me. And I thought that if I bought this gun and she found out, because I knew if I bought the gun, I was going to use it, right? It just gets worse and worse from there. So
downward spiral.
Exactly. Yeah. So I said, maybe my mom gives up, right? Maybe she then says, all right, you're too far gone now. And that was probably the first time in my life at that point where I thought about how my decisions affect other people. I was so used to thinking of myself as a victim. My father's not around. I don't have the money I wish I had. I don't have the life I wish I had. That it was easy to say, okay, well, I'm such a victim that I can then behave in ways that I knew were wrong, but were justifiable. This was the first time where I said, well, actually making a decision, even when I have thought of myself as someone who had no power and no money and no influence, I still make decisions that affect other people. So if I got this gun, I'm affecting my mother, I'm affecting my neighborhood, my community, and that shift in thinking kind of started a long process of looking at myself and the world differently.
There's so much talk about men's bad behavior lately.
Yeah.
And it sort of made me start to wonder, and some of that is because women feel empowered and want to speak out and all those things, and that's all great. But at what point do we start fixing the problem of men's bad behavior? All different kinds.
Yeah.
So that's my like that's sort of what you're trying to do.
Exactly. Like I really believe that we should spend the time to point out what men are doing wrong, right? And the harmful ideologies that young men are being drawn to help explain their frustrations. But if you want to fix the problem, you have to offer an alternative. And in my case, I try to really focus on creating the leadership capacity for young men to be able to change their own circumstances, to see how their own decisions can be improved, to see how they can assume more responsibility in their communities for other young people. My name is Jamil Jivani. I'm from Toronto. Yes.
That's a message Jivani delivers to young people he talks with on a regular basis, providing much needed mentoring, but also opening their worlds to the possibilities that are there for them. He believes now is an important time for young men and how that helps society moving forward.
I can at one hand say not enough boys are finishing high school, and at the same time say we need more programs encouraging female students to go into STEM education, right? Those are not competing goals, and yet we've presented it in this way. In Canada in particular, where we have become global leaders in talking about gender policy,
Yes.
we have not approached the half of our population that isn't included in a strictly kind of woman or female focused gender policy. There's another half of our population I think we need to critically look at. And a lot of the concerns that are raised in media, in communities, in government, relate to the fact that men are struggling in ways that we don't seem prepared to address.
I mean, you allude to it, but it is a little provocative, what you're saying, right? Because women, feminists, would say, geez, we're struggling to get ahead, and now we have to worry about men, and they have it a little bit easier. So what would you say to feminists who would say, well, we need to fix our issues before we turn around and help you? Are they interconnected, those two problems, in some way?
I do, yeah. Like I think a lot of what I'm doing is learning from feminists to critically examine gender, right? So I actually see this as part of the same effort to understand how gender is working in our society. And from my perspective, I think we've learned what happens when you think you can focus on some of us and tell others to wait, right? American democracy is incredibly tribal at the moment, in part because too much of the race conversation has been, let's focus on some parts of American society and tell others to wait. And that is never a way that this works out well, right? I think if you create a zero-sum game where you can only address part of your population and not the other at the same time, then people start to resent each other, they can't work together, and you have a fragmented country. So what I'm asking for us to do basically is to look at how can we reframe our conversations and repurpose our resources to more effectively address the needs that we have.
So that kid lying in his bedroom crying about it, about almost buying a gun, would you have thought that kid would become this man?
No, not at all. Every step of my life has been not knowing anyone else who has been there already and having to figure it out as I go, and accepting that I'm walking a path that is dimly lit. That I'm not necessarily prepared for. So I had no idea, what kind of man I would be like, and certainly would be shocked to learn what my life wound up turning into at that age.
And you talked about that dimly lit path, and just when you're sort of on your path, maybe you think you've got a little bit figured out, you get another curveball.
Yeah.
Stage 4 lymphoma.
Yeah. I was very, in some ways, I thought, when I was a kid, I thought would be a point where life becomes easy, right? Sure. That like you make enough money or you get a certain job and then life kind of becomes easy. And what I've learned, is that's just never the case. No, I'm
still waiting for it too.
And when my book was kind of set to come out, and I was really excited to talk about a lot of my biggest challenges in the past tense, that I had kind of made it past some of the toughest periods of my life. And then 3 weeks before the book came out, I got this diagnosis.
How sick are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. The treatment's been working. I was wearing a neck brace for a couple of months because my spine was fractured in 2 places. The fractures are healing, which is why it's not on me right now. So I'm very grateful. Like the plan that they've put in place to heal me is working. the community that I have around me has has motivated me to do what the doctors want. And so it's been a mix of, great, healthcare, but also, great people in my life. And I don't know how rough of a road is ahead because, you never know with this stuff, but I feel as prepared as I could be to take it on. And I'm going to take it on with, my chin up. So.
Jamil, nice to meet you finally.
Yeah, nice to meet you
I'm glad
too.
we got to do this.
Yeah, thank you
very much.
You heard Jivani mention the fact that he was estranged from his father. It was something he explored in his book. He hadn't heard from his dad in 10 years until a few weeks ago. Jivani's father reached out after hearing news of his son's cancer diagnosis. A closed door may be opened just a crack.